Brandon, we eventually decided to give it a go, and we started that magazine, which ran for 7 issues from 2013 to 15. And that was probably the most exhausting time of my life, because it was, there's only 2 of us doing the actual physical making of it, with Jock Sarong being the editor and me being the creative director and builder of it. And, I did all of the, print, pre-production, print, everything like that, illustration, calligraphy, all of that crap. And so I was doing, that was sort of 10, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week for the best part of 3 years. And the hope had been that was going to be my great last thing, but it ended up we just didn't get it over the line, and we had the 8th issue in the can, ready to go, or nearly, and we had to pull the pin because we just didn't reach our critical mass, and we couldn't afford to lose any more money. And then around that time, I'd been told about the second Reef, and I ended up doing that. And so it was a pretty intense 2012 through to 2016 was full on. And GOQ, I still think, was probably the best thing I've ever done as a thing. And although I was pretty happy with Musica Surfica, it was an interesting time. Leaving advertising I think the key to it all was leaving advertising to just go and follow my heart. That was the strength.
What was the impetus for that? I have to ask, because, you weren't a spring chick when you left, and that's a scary thing to do, to start something new or strike out on something passionate. And I don't know, it's something that I think I weigh all the time, because like you and Toddy, we're all pretty creative and we have lots of ideas, and and you sometimes wonder if maybe doing something for myself or something I'm passionate about is worth it, and leaving the comfort of work or comfort or stability of it.
Well, I think if I analyze it, I go back to when I was in art school and or in high school, figuring out what I wanted to do. And the thing was, I was pretty interested in everything, and I mean everything going, and reasonably good at everything at school, but I was a lazy shit and wanted to go surfing, and barely passed high school, and got into, and I thought, well, I could always draw and I could always write, and I ended up getting into advertising, and that turned me into an advertising creative because, again, I realised I could think conceptually. So I just ended up in that industry. But always I was nutting around with writing little things, and, I'd probably do a couple of paintings a year, and I'd really wanted to be in fine art, I think, in my heart of hearts, but I wasn't. And constantly creative directors and colleagues would say, Mick, you should have been an artist, and I think the truth is that most people in the ad industry, in the creative side, most of them are probably frustrated writers and painters and musicians, but they're doing it to feed their families. And I did that, and I met Sue in 1984, and we married in 1985, and we had started to have a family in 1992. So we had a little bit of like advertising fun time party and all of that, and traveling, and realized we wanted to have kids, and had Joey and then Tommy, and, in fairly quick succession. Tom was born in 95. And so I was on the gravy train, and at the same time at the back, I turned 50, and I thought I turned 50 in 2004, and I'm going, Christ, and also that's kind of old for an advertising creative, particularly in Australia. It doesn't revere your older people particularly. And I thought, and this was at the time of the boom, and housing was going up, and it looked like it was endless. And I thought, well, I consulted my accountant, and he said, well, look, you put your money in your bank, in 5 years it'll have doubled. And I thought, well, that's probably a fair thing. I can sell the house and stick the money away, and still do some freelance and do this little film, and which was the Evolution revisit. Yeah. And we embarked on that, and hence the story that I just told you of doing Musica Surfica. But just as we sold our house for a pretty good price, I had it was, it doesn't matter now, the numbers, but I had, about $700,000 in the bank, and this is in mid-2000s, and I thought, well, if I double that in 5 years, I'll have over $1 million and I can get back in the market. And anyway, what happened in the end was that 2 weeks after I put the money in the bank, the GFC happened and half of it disappeared. And so I went, okay, well, that sort of focused me a little bit. And we had kids in schools that required fees, and I was chasing my tail and all sorts. We had basically, in the end, we had a financial disaster in parallel with all of the Musica Surfica things going on. And so by the time 2012 came along and I'd done the first Reef, around that time, Sue and I had moved to Torquay. And the reason we moved down here was to rent a house now because we couldn't own one, and live somewhere nice and see whether we can recreate a life. And by this time now, I'm 2012, I'm 60 odd, pushing in on 60. What am I saying? 2012. I'm 60. I turned 67 last Sunday. So
holy,
that's right. Hey, I sent you a Marco Polo. I don't know if you got it.
I did, and I'll explain why I hadn't answered. But anyway, look, the whole point, the thrust of it was that I ended up living in Torquay, which was great, and I started to do some work at an agency in Melbourne, 2-3 days a week, back into that, and doing a lot of commuting, which is an hour and 20 minutes. Actually, it's a 2-hour drive at peak hour, and from here, and doing that, I was either couch surfing or doing that 2-3 days a week. Sue was working in fashion retailing, and up in Melbourne, managing some shops, and I had also started a little cleaning business down here. And we were basically surviving, but starting to slip into a regime of a life that was, as a lifestyle, good. We got to the point where we could actually buy the house we were living in, and which we did 4 years ago with the help of some family help. It was basically, well, it was pitch in and rescue Mick because he's gone and stuffed up. But things were going well. But then, as you know, Sue suddenly contracted pancreatic cancer, and that was like a shock like you can never believe, because it wasn't just got it. It was the first indication that she had it was that night was they said, there's nothing we can do. You're going to die. It wasn't and it's all buts. And so we had to deal with, well, what do we do? Basically, she said, oh, well, this is what I want played at the funeral as we're driving home. That was the conversation. I want this piece of music and that piece of music. And then it was a case of complete disbelief, and got home and then just had a cup of tea and went to bed and sort of picked ourselves up and started to go, okay, let's deal with it. And that, I suppose, I don't know whether I'm out of turn talking about it, but that process of being with someone as they prepare to die was obviously it's one of the heaviest things you can ever go through, and particularly when somebody you love so deeply. And we'd been married for 4 years by now. And that was probably one of the most courageous things I've ever seen, watching Sue deal with it, because she just wouldn't allow unhappiness around her. And the pain med thing was ridiculous, with this amplification of variations on morphine over a period of 4 months. Chemotherapy, the first time we got a little bit of a lift, but it nearly killed her. At one stage she's got about 3 days to live because she had this issue pop up, but then that cleared and we got a little flurry of goodness, and by Christmas, so we're talking from August to Christmas, it's not long, and we had a nice Christmas, and then three weeks later she was gone. And it was, but the whole time she, like she smiled and laughed the whole way. She wouldn't allow people to cry around her. She'd be cajoling people to come on, cracking jokes, and you've met her, Ty, and Toddy stayed here with us about 4 years ago, and so then she was gone. So 2019 was me regrouping a little bit. I was just trying to come to terms with suddenly being by myself, and I've got my son Tommy, who was recovering from a whole bunch of injury-related issues from his skating, and at Sue's funeral, oddly enough, the guys from GOQ said to me, "What about revisiting Great Ocean Quarterly?" And 2019, I just couldn't do it. I was pretty much, gone. And beginning of 2020, we went, and I was open by then, and we did the Lost Dates issue, and that was fantastic because it reinvigorated me. And now we're looking at restarting the magazine in a form that will be
profitable?
4 issues. Well, yeah. Well, what we did to do the
sorry.
Yeah. No, well, that's look. I'm not. The way we funded the Lost Dates was to do a crowd fund. We said, nice, we're going to do this, and we just put it out there, and we raised the money, and we were able to put a little bit of money to pay for our time, and that made it doubly. Well, it didn't. The point was we actually got paid a little bit to do it, but because it was funded before we started, we were able to do issues-based advertising. We had, Greenpeace, not Greenpeace,
Patagonia?
Charities, basically.
Oh,
Patagonia, that's right. Yeah, Patagonia was in there, that sort of stuff. I'll have to grab a magazine.
I should say, if you don't know what Great Ocean Quarterly is, it's just amazing.
It's pretty great.
It's a big, glossy magazine that feels slightly somewhere between, it feels like you're holding a surf magazine, but it's filled with poetry and writing and anecdote and talking story and observations, and it's about the water. It's about being close to the water. It's about people whose brains simply are full of it, Yeah, it's incredible.
Because the idea was that, I went back to my school days when I was interested in everything, and I thought there's got to be, and being obviously an oceanic diverted person, there must be more people like me out there. And that was so I was interested in art, I was interested in ideas, and I was interested in the sea. And that became the mantra of the magazine, Art, Ideas in the Sea, or for people with sea-affected lives. So it was...
I've become inflicted with sea.
I've become exactly. I've got it. The sea is in me. And so I'd love poetry. I write poetry, or attempt to, writing, art, photography, literary writing. The only prerequisite was saltiness. That's the brief. If it's salty, it's in. If you live on a shoreline, it's in. Even if it's a lake, it'll do, because it's just everybody has that connection with an horizon, I suppose. And so that was what it became. And Jock Sarong, who, as I said, was the editor, he's a lawyer who ditched the law to become an author, and he's got now 5 bestsellers under his belt. Wow. And he's a brilliant guy, fabulous writer. And my other partner was Mark Willett, who's a round-the-world yachtsman. He did 2 Whitbread round-the-world races in the 80s. He he does co-own an ad agency still, but he's a complete adventurer, Mark. He's a big wave surfer, mad as a cut snake in the best way possible. He's probably, close to my best friend in the world. I've got a few really close friends. You guys are in there too, believe me. But honestly, but Marky, he's, he's game for anything, and he was the one that said, "Yes, Mick, let's do this." And if you met Mark, it's like, he's like an angel with a head like a walnut, and as you